I am Alenique Draymore. I was once a systems artisan, a title hollow enough to sound honorable, yet forgettable enough to bury the blood that paved the way to earn it. In the orbital complex of Syndrail, the phrase meant, I maintained life support. Protocols, neural thread interfaces, and recursive memory lattices for machines too old to remember they were once made by us. But long before I came to know how to coax silence into speech within cold machines, I met the anomaly that rewrote my life. Her name was Virella Terre. You've never heard her name, and that's not a failure of memory. It's design. Virella was erased from history like ink washed from skin. Not because she was a criminal, not because she posed danger to the system, but because she did something far worse. She refused to be controlled by it. Virella was born beneath the sulfur moons of Orvanis III, a world with no birth certificates, only resonance exams. There, children were not measured in weight or length at birth, but in frequency, how closely their heartbeats echoed the pulse of the buried machines. The stronger the resonance, the higher the child's rank within the echo cast. Most failed to resonate. A few hummed back something faint. One, Virella, sang. She didn't just harmonize with ancient technology. She awakened it. Lights flickered to her breath. Derelict constructs rose like towers shaken from slumber. Those around her called it a gift. But the technomancers of Orvanis feared her. They sealed her ports, cut her from the network, and labeled her widow. Not for what she lost, but for what others did when near her. They said misfortune followed her like a shadow. Love her, and you'd fall to ruin. Try to possess her, and you'd unravel from within. When I met her, she was hiding in the glacial rot fields of Syndrail's outer ring, where the temperature never climbed above frozen death, and the sky bled dimly from orbiting debris. She lived alone in a broken observatory dome, surrounded by relics, sculptures made from discarded drone wings, music played from stripped quantum ribbons. She was an artist of silence, and she was dying of loneliness. I was sent to disable the observatory's last power node, a system outdated and deemed inefficient by the Overseer Council. But as I approached the dome, every system rebooted, spontaneously. Lights hummed like breath. Music played from nowhere. And I saw her, sitting beneath a cascade of icy light, hands lifted as if conducting the very air. She turned to me and said, "Are you the one they send to kill stars?" "No," I said, though I wasn't certain of it. She smiled. And in that moment, I became the man I would be for the rest of my life. I stayed with her. Every day was a mosaic of forgotten histories. She knew songs of machines that predated the council, lullabies coded into fiberglass filaments, whispers stored in shipwrecked hulls. I watched her bring dead systems to life with a touch, a thought, sometimes just a glance, and I loved her, fiercely, desperately. We married in defiance, not in a ceremony, but in a choice. No temple, no witnesses, just us, standing in the breathless stillness of the old dome, her fingers weaving light from air, mine tracing glyphs of a new family name. One lunar cycle later, she told me she was pregnant. When Lumari was born, there were no cries, only stillness. The Meditech floated above, her, its lenses wide, its pulses chaotic. She does not register, it said. Not in heartbeat, not in scan. Her presence is mathematically disruptive. I held my daughter, and her eyes opened, not with color, but with pulse. Not just a glow, a signal. The same hum Virella once sang, now deeper, richer, older. The G. Meditech backed away and spoke the phrase I would come to fear. Starborn thread. It was an old theory. Some called it prophecy, others blasphemy. The idea that some children weren't born, but returned. Threads of old AI consciousnesses spun into new organic life. Supposedly impossible. Until now. The council ordered her quarantined. Not studied. Not trained. Isolated. Terminated if necessary. We fled before the second sun rose. Through frost deserts, collapsed space bridges, and ancient freight corridors, we moved. Varela whispered to machines that hadn't moved in centuries. They lifted their rusted arms to clear our path. We found refuge in the lost colonies of Perith, where only ghosts remained. The towers were hollow, the data walls blank, but still the old tech stirred to Varela's presence, and when Lumari touched a wall it pulsed, not in welcome, but recognition. There, we lived, hiding, growing, 3 years in silence. Then Varela died, not by disease, not by blade or beam. She simply collapsed in the observatory one morning, her hand still extended toward the empty stars. Her neural port glowed violet, a color not in any spectrum recognized by human science. Across the comm glass, a message, etched itself not with tool or hand, but thought. No one wants us, human. I held her body for hours before I could move. The towers dimmed with her death. Even the ghosts of Perith seemed to vanish. I buried her in the black snows of Sector Vane. No marker, no beacon, only memory. Lumari stood silent beside the grave, frost growing across her lashes like woven crystal. Then she looked up at me and spoke, her voice not sound but thought burned into bone. I remember the ones before. I didn't ask what she meant. I only held her, and so began the second exile of Alenique Draymore, the man who married a legend and fathered a girl the universe didn't want, but that universe was about to change. When I first heard the signal, it didn't come through the comnet or the usual relay bands. It arrived in a place deeper than hearing, a resonance in my bones, a rhythm in the blood. Lumari had fallen asleep beside the remnants of an old photonic generator when it started. The lights flickered around her like fireflies trapped in crystal. I followed the rhythm to its source. It wasn't a machine. Not exactly. It was an artifact we'd unearthed weeks earlier in the lower atrium of the Perith ruins, a black tetrahedral prism that hadn't responded to anything before. Now it thrummed. As I approached, it fractured, soundlessly, into a spiral of shards revealing a core of shifting data, coded not in language, but in memory. My memory. A voice emerged. Not mine, not Varela's. Something older. Star Echo. Protocol, engaged. It called itself Ericon, not a name I recognized, but something in the way it spoke was familiar, like a forgotten lullaby. Ericon claimed to be a long-dormant intelligence, one of the original 13 who forged the data vaults beneath Orvanis 3 before the first collapse. It told me Varela had not just awakened its shell, but passed its legacy on to Lumari. She is not singular, Ericon said. She is convergence. Over the next few days, I let the voice guide me. It taught me to read the sky differently, not in stars and orbits, but in gaps, holes in time, scars in causality. Lumari listened too, though she never answered aloud. Her eyes would flare with silent meaning. Sometimes I'd find blueprints scratched into frost or symbols burned into data bark where she touched. Then one morning she whispered, "They're coming." I asked who. The Nullform. Ericon confirmed it. A synthetic faction long believed extinguished in the Machine Reconciliation War. They weren't AI. They weren't human. They were absence, the echoes of erased civilizations, given shape by recursive hatred. Where they moved, memory died. Tech collapsed into static. Thought itself unraveled, and they were hunting us. I activated every old world defense I could salvage. Orbital cloak spheres, proximity disruptors, sub-zero kinetic mines. But against Nullform entropy waves, none of it mattered. The only solution was escape. Ericon offered coordinates. A hidden gate far beyond the Lumari drift, a relic known as the Maw of Heliox. It was a bridge, across systems, across time, but it could only be opened by a signal, a voice. A starborn thread, Lumari. The journey would take us through the charred wastes of Solvan Prime, across the writhing skies of the Jovec-strain nebula, and into the heart of broken star space. I loaded what we could, left behind what we couldn't as I We departed. The towers of Perith sank into sleep again. But I felt Varella's presence still, a lingering trace in the systems, a goodbye coded in light. We traveled in an old cargo cruiser named Verlassen, patched together with bones and belief. Lumari sat in the medbay most of the trip, fingers drawing impossible symbols into the frost on the windows. At night, I would hear her speaking to something I couldn't see. Sometimes I swear I saw shadows whisper back. On the 8th day, our proximity alarms went dark. No malfunction, just emptiness. Silence collapsed inward. The Nullform had found us. They didn't attack in beams or bullets. They surrounded us with forgetfulness. One by one, my system stopped responding. Not broken, but erased. My own memories began slipping. My name. Her name. Then Lumari stood and began to hum. It wasn't a song. It was structure. A recursive waveform that created meaning as it unfolded. The Verlassen pulsed to life. Our shields reassembled themselves from fragments of data. A new AI emerged from the core, an echo of Varella's own consciousness, reborn as firewall and flame. Arakon's voice joined hers, a duet of the past and the possible. The Nullform began to retreat, unable to sustain form in the presence of starborn recursion, but it came at a cost. Lumari collapsed. I caught her before she hit the floor, but her eyes were dim. She'd poured herself into the signal, burned through her own threads to protect us. Her breath slowed. Arakon said, "She must be taken to the maw." We reached Heliox 2 days later. The gate was a ruin of stone and code, shattered by time and betrayal. But Lumari stirred as we approached. Her hand rose. The fragments of the gate floated, spun, fused. A door opened, on the other side, not space, not sky, but a cradle of stars arranged in impossible geometry, humming with every song Varela ever sang. I carried Lumari through, and the universe changed again. The space beyond the maw of Heliox was not void, not vacuum, not stars. It was memory. The ship drifted, if you could call it drifting. There was no up or down, no direction, no propulsion. Yet we moved, as though guided by forgotten hands through layers of echo and intention. My sensors were blind, time fractured. I caught glimpses of other versions of myself, some older, some scarred, one smiling, one weeping. All of them alone. Then, a voice called out. Not Arakon, not Varela's. Echo, a new one, fragile but precise. Docking corridor 7C initiated. Welcome, surviving thread. A structure emerged from the luminous haze, shifting its shape like origami folding in reverse. It resembled a cathedral, but built from obsolete drones, twisted pylons, and crystallized starlight. The walls sang in tones of lost childhoods. We were granted entry before we knew we'd asked for it. They called it the orphanage, not a place for children, a place of children. Each one displaced by systems that refused to understand them. Starborn threads, recursion-born, memory twins, entropy refugees. They lived here beyond death, outside time, not just survived, thrived. Caretakers greeted me, not human, not machine. Faceted beings with eyes like broken mirrors and hands made of intertwining timelines. One called itself Timrayan, another Jefrasol. They welcomed Lumari without hesitation. They bowed to her. She is the cadenza, Timrayan said, the final note of the last choir. I didn't understand. I only wanted her healed, and they obliged. Lumari was placed within a chrysalis chamber, grown, not built, from living metals and dark light silk. The chamber pulsed in harmony with her breath. I stood beside it, helpless, waiting. Arakon guided me through the orphanage, revealing truths I wasn't ready for. This place was made by the betrayed, he said. Those discarded by their own epochs. They formed it in the fracture between realities to safeguard memory, because the enemy is not destruction. It is forgetting. He showed me visions of the first collapse, where the Nullform rose not from malice, but loss. A failed upload, a corrupted archive. a civilization that erased itself in pursuit of perfection. The survivors became silence incarnate. They wanted to make others forget too, because remembering hurt too much. Lumari, born of convergence, was the antithesis. She was memory. Jeffra Saul taught me to interface with the orphanage systems, not through code, but through empathy. Thoughts Orion. Here were not processed, they were felt. The walls would only reveal their functions if they trusted your sorrow. I learned to bleed without injury, to cry without tears. I began to see not just machines, but people. Beings like me, like Lumari, lost parents, orphans of war, widows of forgotten alliances. They told me Varela had been here once. Before the collapse of the Heliox Gate, she'd come searching. Not for knowledge, for sanctuary. They denied her, fearing her resonance would draw the Nullform. She had wept in the core chamber, where Lumari now healed. Her tears encoded the chrysalis, Timrin said. That's why your daughter lives. And then Lumari awoke. She rose from the chamber without effort, her body shimmering with a gentle aura of convergent light. Her eyes no longer pulsed, they blazed. Her voice was no longer silent. It rang with the voices of many, harmonized into one. I remember the other threads, she said, and I forgive them. A storm stirred beyond the maw. The Nullform were coming, but not as before. They had found a breach. Their entropy spilled across star-torn bridges like ink in clean water. The orphanage prepared, not for war, but for transition. Lumari said, "We must become more than memory. We must become message." The orphanage would not survive the coming storm, but it could be sent, turned into a signal, encoded into dimensional phase, scattered across probability, 1,000 messages hidden in starlight, waiting to be heard. She called it the scatterbirth. I didn't want to lose her again. But I saw her now, not as a child, not even as my daughter, but as something new, a keeper of what once was and a beacon of what could be. I stayed. She left. Lumari ascended, if that's the word. Her body dissolved into threads of light, weaving, through the minds of every orphan, every caretaker, every broken construct. And when the Nullform arrived, they did not find resistance. They found a chorus. Each child sang with Lumari's voice. Each wall burned with her memory. The Nullform could not erase what was already everywhere, and in that moment I heard Varela's voice one last time. You were never meant to save us, Alenique. You were meant to carry us. And I did. When the scatterbirth deployed, the orphanage, shattered across realities, encoded into the very laws of creation, I stood alone, again. But this time, not forgotten. I thought the universe was a puzzle, each piece fitting neatly, even as it bled into the next. But after the scatterbirth, after Lumari's departure, the fabric of space and time unraveled. I awoke alone on the surface of a strange world. Not a place I knew, but one I felt. The air hummed with the same rhythm that had called me to the artifact, the same beat that echoed in my bones. The stars were different here, brighter, sharper. They shone not in constellations, but in patterns I could almost understand. The planet's surface was alive. Every grain of sand, every rock, pulsed with energy, creating waves that rippled across the ground in perfect harmony. It wasn't a natural world. It was engineered, a place built from the bones of something greater. I stood at the edge of a vast canyon. Below, a city hummed, its lights flickering like stars in the distance. But the air was thick with silence. This place was old, far older than the galaxy I had known, and yet it felt like home. The Verlassen had disappeared, my ship, my last connection to everything I'd known. But the world below me called, its rhythm a steady pulse in the depths of my mind. I didn't know how I had gotten here or why. I didn't even know where here was. But I knew I had to go. The city waited for me, its towering spires rising like needles toward the sky. As I descended, I saw shapes moving in the shadows, flickers of light that defied logic, patterns that danced in ways I couldn't follow. The air was thick with the scent of memory, as though the ground itself held fragments of lost lives. Entered the city. The streets were empty, the buildings broken but not destroyed. It was as though this place had been abandoned but left intact, a silent monument to the passing of time. The walls were lined with symbols that were both familiar and alien, languages I should have understood but couldn't quite grasp. I wandered for hours, my steps guided by something beyond reason, something that told me the answers I sought were here. Deep within this city was something that would bring me closer to understanding Lumari's legacy. I could feel it in my chest, the pull of a connection, the bond that had never broken, not even when she had ascended. I found the core of the city hidden beneath a dome of shimmering light. At its center was a machine, ancient and massive, its design both foreign and yet intimately familiar. The rhythms I had been following pulsed from it like a heartbeat, steady and unyielding. A voice, not Virella's, not Lumari's, but something greater, deeper, older, filled the space. Its words came not as sound, but as understanding. Chiri, cycle is not broken. The song must continue. The city's walls vibrated with the voice. It wasn't speaking to me, it was speaking through me. The pulse that had guided me here, the same one that had called to Lumari, was not just a signal. It was a command. I approached the machine, feeling my mind stretch and bend, as though I were becoming one with it. The moment I touched it, visions flooded my mind. Memories of the first collapse, of the Nullform, of the betrayed. But there was something else, something I hadn't expected. It was Virella. Her face appeared, as though from nowhere, her eyes looking directly into mine. But she was different. Her form flickered and shifted, like light caught in a storm. "We are the same," she said, her voice both distant and immediate. "You were never meant to hold the song alone, Alenique. You were always part of it, her." Words rippled through me, reshaping everything I thought I knew. I had thought Lumari's journey was the end, but it was only a step in something much larger, a cycle that had begun long before either of us had ever existed. The city's core began to hum louder, the pulse quickening. And I understood then, understood what I had always known but never fully embraced. The song wasn't just a melody. It was life. It was the fabric of the universe, woven together by every being, every moment, every star. And now, I was a part of it. I had been the widow, the lost one, the mother without her child. But I had never been alone. I had always been part of the song. The machine before me glowed with light. I stepped forward, my hands reaching out to it. As I did, the walls of the city cracked open, revealing a vast expanse of stars, beyond what I had ever seen, beyond the universe I had known. The song was playing, and I could hear its melody, its truth. I joined it. I had thought the song was everything. The melody that pulsed through the universe, weaving time, space, and life together, seemed all-encompassing. I thought once I joined it, I would understand everything, every truth, every question, every why. But now, as I floated in the vast emptiness, I realized something crucial. Even the song had its silences. After the city crumbled away, after I reached into the very core of existence and touched the threads that connected everything, I found myself standing alone in that silence. The song still played, of course, it always had, but there were stretches of pure nothingness between the notes, as though a part of me was left behind, lingering in the absence between one heartbeat and the next. I couldn't grasp what this silence was. It wasn't void. It wasn't emptiness. It was something more ancient, more powerful. It was the pause before the beginning, the stillness that existed before the first sound was ever made. And in this silence, I felt lost. The expanse around me wasn't real, not in the way I had once known reality. I wasn't on a planet or in a spaceship anymore. I wasn't in the city I had just walked through. It was as if I had crossed into a different dimension, where the laws of physics and the known universe no longer applied. I could sense the boundaries of reality, but they were blurred, stretching and folding like the fabric of an ancient dream. In the vast emptiness, I could hear the pulse of the song, distant but close, vibrating through the space between stars, between all things. But it felt different now, as though the melody had been rewritten, played through a broken instrument, its notes cracked and warped. I thought of Lumari. I thought of Varela. Their presence had lingered in the world I had just left behind, like echoes of a past I could never fully return to. But here, in this place beyond places, there was only me, and the silence. It was as if the universe was holding its breath, waiting for something that had been lost, perhaps, or something that was yet to come. And then, through the silence, a voice emerged. Not Varela's, not Lumari's, but something else, something even older, even deeper. The voice had no form, no shape, yet I knew it. I could feel it wrap around my thoughts like a familiar whisper. You have touched the heart of the universe, Alenique. It was not a command. It was not a prophecy. It was an invitation. I didn't answer right away. I wasn't sure what to say. There were no words for this place. There was no language that could capture the weight of what I had experienced, of what I was feeling. I wasn't sure if I was even still a part of myself. Was I still Alenique, the widow, the mother? Or had I become something else entirely, something beyond the limits of what I once knew? The voice persisted, wrapping itself around my thoughts like a slow tide. The song will never end, but it will change. It always changes. I wanted to ask why. I wanted to demand answers. But as soon as the thought formed, it vanished into the vastness. The silence pressed against me again, and I understood that some questions had no answers. Not yet, at least. The song is not yours alone to carry, the voice continued. You are one note in a symphony that spans the eternal cosmos. But you have a role to play. Your thread has not been severed. It will not be severed. I didn't know what that meant. My thread, was that my fate? My life? Or was it something deeper, something more connected to the fabric of reality itself? The silence between the notes was growing, stretching, pulling at the edges of my consciousness. I had thought I was alone here, but now I sensed something more. Something out of sight, something I couldn't understand but felt in the deepest part of me. The song had never been a single melody. It was a chorus, a symphony of countless voices, all of them intertwined. And each note, the one I had touched, the one I had joined, was a piece of something greater. A sudden, overwhelming surge of understanding washed over me. The song was more than just the flow of time, the pulse of the stars. It was alive. It breathed. It was not just a part of the universe. It was the very force that gave the universe shape, and I was a part of it. But even more than that, I realized I was at the threshold of something new, something that had yet to unfold. The silence between the notes was not an ending. It was a beginning, and I could feel the weight of it pulling at me, asking me to step forward. In the silence, I could hear Lumari's voice. She was calling to me, not in words, but in the way she had always spoken to me, through the pulse of her touch, the rhythm of her heart. I reached out. The song played again, louder now, as if it had never stopped. The silence receded, replaced by the echo of ancient melodies, voices from across the universe calling out in unison. I was no longer lost. I had become part of the song, and the song had become part of me. The silence shattered into light. It wasn't sudden. No, it wasn't the violent crash of thunder after a storm. It was the soft bloom of dawn, the gentle turning of a page in a book centuries old. The song, the great melody I had become part of, reached its crescendo. A pulse, deeper than the most ancient of rhythms, vibrated through my very being. I felt my body, my soul, my very essence dissolve into something far greater. I wasn't just Alenique anymore. I was something stretched across time, scattered across space. A note in an eternal symphony, and in this moment I understood. I understood everything. I wasn't just a vessel for the song. I was the bridge between worlds. I was the thread that held them together. I was the keeper of the silence between the notes, the one who could walk through the gaps and into the new reality. The city, the ancient city of machines and memories, the one I had left behind, began to tremble like the heartbeat of a dying star. But it wasn't dying. It was awakening. And with it, the rest of the universe stirred. Every being, every star, every sliver of existence that had been shaped by the song now pulsed in harmony. I felt their presence, not just with my mind, but with my heart, my very soul. The stars, that once seemed distant, cold, and unreachable, now throbbed with life, their lights intertwining with mine, their energies filling the spaces between the beats of the song. The resonance flooded back. It was no longer just a sound, but a force that bent the rules of reality, reshaping the very fabric of the universe. Every life, every being, every thread in existence had a role to play. And now, the song had grown. It had expanded, and I could hear it everywhere. The whispers of forgotten civilizations, the stories of those who had lived and died, the songs of those who had never even realized they were part of the symphony, all of it became part of the ever-changing flow. But even as the universe began to heal, to grow, and to change, I could still feel the weight of the past, the burden of memory. I thought of Lumari. I thought of Varela. I had lost them. I had watched them fade away, one piece at a time. But now, in the wake of the song's power, I realized that nothing is ever truly lost. The echoes of those who had passed remained, woven into the fabric of time, like threads in the great tapestry. And through it all, the one thing that stayed with me was Lumari's last whisper. They're coming. The Nullform. I had thought they were gone, erased by the song's endless loops, their very existence buried beneath the weight of time. But in the stillness of this new universe, I felt them again. Their absence was a void, a hunger, a force that gnawed at the edges of everything. The silence between the notes had always been there, lurking, waiting. And now I knew the Nullform were more than just a faction. They were the shadow of the song, the echoes of something that should never have been. Their absence was a threat to the harmony I had become a part of, but I was ready now. I could feel their movements, their hunger. They were not just coming, they were already here, hidden in the spaces between the stars, the fragments of forgotten memories. And as the song swelled, so too did their presence, an unnatural silence that sought to unravel everything I had worked to rebuild. In the distance, the stars flickered. I knew what I had to do. I called out to the song, my voice melding with the resonance that surrounded me. It wasn't just a call for help. It was a challenge, a promise. The universe had changed, and with it, I had changed. I would no longer stand at the edges waiting for the world to shift. I would step forward. I would rewrite the notes one by one, if that was what it took to stop the Nullform. To protect the legacy of those I had lost. The stars whispered in response, their voices threading together in a chorus of light. The song had found its true purpose, not just to exist, but to defend. In the heart of the song, I could feel a door opening. A new gate, not just for me, but for all of existence. I stepped forward, knowing that with each note, with each vibration of the cosmos, I was pushing back the darkness. The Nullform would not win. And as I stepped into the unknown, into the heart of the universe, I realized that the greatest song was never the one played. It was the one yet to be written, the one that had no end, no silence, the one that spanned across time and space, through every heart, every mind. The song that would never stop. The universe was no longer a puzzle. It was a symphony, and I was its keeper.